Welcome to the University of Illinois Wheelchair Track Team's video series on how to use finger-thumb glove style. I'm Adam Blakeney. I'm the head coach of the University of Illinois Wheelchair Track Team. In this video, we'll cover the fourth and final phase comprising the racing wheelchair stroke. Because during this phase, the glove is not in contact with the hand ring, many of the points covered are applicable across different glove styles. The stroke's final phase is called the separate and accelerate phase. Above all, the goal of this phase is to create optimal separation between the hand and the hand ring. That's to say, we want the athlete to achieve the greatest amount of separation, but only the extent that it allows them to smoothly transition back onto the hand ring during load. Generally, an athlete will achieve greater separation as velocity increases. Here in this video, we have an athlete pushing on a free spinning roller, very much a high velocity environment. She's moving around 25 miles an hour here. You clearly see the hand separation. Note how she's created sizable distance in which to accelerate back to load. Now this type of separation is not always optimal. In a higher load environment with more resistance at play, this type of separation would likely be out of sync with the hand ring's velocity. Loading with this incongruence would cause a sudden jarring interruption to her hand upon load and would be terribly inefficient. Here we have the same athlete in a different environment. Instead of a free spinning roller, here she is outdoors on a track with more resistance to be overcome. Note the difference in separation. Much less than in the previous video, but only because this amount of separation is the optimal amount. She's creating the greatest amount of separation that is effective for the speed she is traveling, around 18 miles an hour. Now what separate looks like is determined by seating position, which is itself determined by functional capacity. In the previous videos, we saw an athlete whose hands move nearly straight up toward the sky during separate, but it's not the case that the hands must move upward to achieve optimal separation. For an athlete who sits with more dump, meaning their butt sits lower than their knees, the hand will tend to move more backwards. In the video on the left, we see a T53 athlete sitting as such. Notice how his hands are reaching back, never getting any higher than the top of the wheel. However, notice the amount of separation between the hand and the hand ring before acceleration begins. This is optimal. As a counter look, on the video on the right, we have an athlete who sits much flatter, butt's higher, knees are lower. Now we see the hands separating up toward the sky. This too is optimal. As the athlete reaches peak separation, that is, the point in which the greatest distance exists between the hand and the hand ring, we'll see the chest in an open stretch position. In the earlier video in which we discussed the drive phase, we referenced the power position as a key shape that the athlete must assume. This is a comparable position and a key shape we want to see the athlete in during separate and accelerate. Note in these images the relationship between the hand, elbow, shoulder, and chest. Notice how the athletes are perched up, poised, and ready to attack the hand ring. In concert with achieving optimal hand separation, the athlete must maintain the hand and elbow path created by release, carrying the momentum in a linear fashion during both separate and accelerate. Here we have a bird's eye view angle of an athlete. I want you first to pay attention to the elbow. Notice how it follows a linear trajectory from release, carrying momentum to peak separate and never crosses the path during accelerate. Well, let's focus on the hand, but now we're just concerned with the path it creates from release. Again, like the elbow, it carries momentum in a smooth and linear fashion. Different angle here, but focusing on the same principle. Notice both the elbow and the hand achieving smooth, linear paths. The final goal during separate and accelerate is to reposition the hand for load. Note how this athlete moves her thumb up toward the ceiling as she moves closer to the hand ring, preparing the glove for a smooth and seamless load. We touched on this goal during our presentation on load as we used the cue thumb to the ceiling to prompt the desired hand position. An effective cue we use during separate and accelerate is reach back and up for the apple. Note how this athlete positions his hands backwards and up with his palms facing the ceiling during separate. By doing so, he's positioned his hand to pick up the apple in his palm. The mistake we see most frequently in very novice athletes is a very choppy, truncated separate and accelerate phase. The movement evokes up and down lines rather than elegant circles. Here's an athlete, very new to the sport, moving in this fashion. The second mistake we see during separate and accelerate is a squeezing together of the elbows during peak separate. In this video, we see the path of the right elbow indicated by the red line. Notice how it curves in toward the midline at its highest point. This is an indication of elbow squeeze. Now, in contrast, same athlete after correcting this inefficiency. Now, when we draw that elbow path, notice the absence of that curve. Rather, we see a very linear and smooth movement. Now, the reason we want to avoid elbow squeeze is that it interrupts the linear path of momentum of both the hand and the elbow, creating an inefficiency in the stroke. Here we have a best practice example of optimal separate and accelerate. This is performed by a Paralympic gold medalist.